Welcome to Raise the Line with Osmosis.org, seeking solutions with leading experts on how to increase healthcare capacity so people can get the care they need during the COVID-19 crisis and beyond.
Hi, I'm Rishi Desai, and today on Raise the Line, I'm happy to be joined by Kate Eberle Walker, CEO of PresenceLearning, the leading provider of online special education therapy services for K-12 schools. She's also the author of The Good Boss, 9 Ways That Every Manager Can Support Women at Work. Kate has more than 20 years of experience leading education companies. She was the CEO of the Princeton Review, a leading provider of test prep, admissions, and tutoring services, including online on-demand tutoring under the Tutor.com brand. Founded in 2009, PresenceLearning partners with schools to expand their capacity to serve all students with IEPs or behavioral mental health needs. Their large national network of over 1,500 speech-language pathologists, occupational therapists, and school psychologists deliver services through an award-winning proprietary teletherapy platform. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Awesome. So, Kate, I'd love to just start by getting a sense for how are you doing with everything that's going on in the world? How are you and how is your family?
We're doing great. I mean, as great as anyone can be doing. We were just talking about how it's been over a year now since any of us have been on an airplane, which is strange to be staying so close to home, but it's been really nice in other ways to get to, have weekday lunches with my daughters when they have a break from school and I have a break from work. So we're finding the silver linings.
That's awesome. Yeah. Lunches in the middle of the day with kids is something that a lot of parents are now coming accustomed to and might even start missing once kids start going back to school.
Yeah. It's so much healthier too. I mean, I'm actually eating lunch, right? I'm actually taking the time to eat lunch.
Yeah, no, same is true on my end. I definitely am cultivating a lot of good habits because I'm trying to model them for my kids. So as a result, you have such an amazing background in education. Obviously, it's an interesting time with education right now. I'd love to know your background, like what got you started, especially your interest in online special education therapy and presence learning.
Yeah. So I've always had an interest in, call it the intersection of technology and education. And to me, the most valuable thing we can do as companies in this area is figure out how to use tech to bring the right experts closer to the students, to the kids who need them. And so, that was a big part of what I did when I was running Tutor.com. The whole idea was kids need help from subject matter experts. And so let's build something that makes those experts accessible and affordable just at the right moment when kids need them. And so with that, when I got to know PresenceLearning and what they were doing, it was, to me, the ultimate business to get the opportunity to run because they were doing exactly that. They had built a tech platform that was bringing the specialists, the special education clinicians, closer to the students and giving a lot of kids access to the experts that they, weren't otherwise getting coming into their schools. And, it was doing it in the area of education that, I think needs it the most. These are the kids in the public education system who have learning disabilities, have special needs, and they need the support.
So for those that don't know PresenceLearning, what is that teletherapy? What does that look like? And what was happening before PresenceLearning came on the scene? Like what's standard and what does PresenceLearning do differently?
Probably the first thing that's helpful to know about how special education works in schools is that there's actually a federal law, the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, that requires all public schools to provide support to students with learning disabilities. And there are over 7 million kids across the U.S. public education system who have a disability and have required services that are delivered through their public schools. A lot of that is speech therapy, speech language pathology, or occupational therapy, or other types of counseling. And despite the fact that schools have teams to do this work and they have that, federal mandate to do it, before teletherapy came along, a lot of those services were just going unmet, mostly because of a hiring need and, a capacity gap, so to speak. So there are only so many of these professionals they're highly skilled, and only a subset of them do work in schools. And so schools would try their best to recruit, to hire, and in some cases, they'd have shortages on their staff, and that would trickle down to the kids who wouldn't then get their therapy sessions or wouldn't get the full requirement delivered. And so teletherapy really came to be an education in that context of saying, well, we can help connect those therapists to the kids. And it started out in the very rural, remote parts of the country where you had these very large districts by square mileage geographic measure, and they weren't able to get the talent in their areas and hire them and have them physically come to the schools. So they became sort of the first innovators who, bought into this idea of, well, what of the work can we do online? And, what could allow us to make use of a part of the workforce that lives elsewhere but wants to do the work.
And so I'm just thinking through the lens of a teacher, is there a challenge? Like, let's say I have a classroom full of, 20 students, and let's say 2 of those students are on an IEP. Do they have those students sit in front of a computer and then interact with the teletherapist? Is that what's happening? And then the other 18 kids continue with their curriculum? Or I'm just curious about the logistics of how that is. And the reason I ask is that I have a 4-year-old, and getting him to spend time in front of a computer has been like a Herculean challenge for me. And so I'm just curious, like logistically, how does that work in a classroom setting?
It requires another adult. So typically what happens, if it's happening inside the school, is there will be a learning coach, or, someone will come and get the child and bring them to another quieter space to sit in front of the computer, and they'll stay in the room. So they won't be directly involved in delivering the teletherapy, but they'll be the supervision on the scene, so to speak, to make sure that it happens. And these days, that learning coach, is very often the parent.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So essentially the parent also is learning from the teletherapist as well, right? Like presumably. It's
a really nice side benefit or incremental benefit to this, is parents getting to watch what happens and learn it. I mean, it helps them know what to do with their children. One of my daughters gets online speech therapy, and I love watching and learning and seeing what really happens.
And this has implications. I mean, you mentioned rural. I'm also thinking of the fact that these challenges exist beyond American borders. Do you all have a presence outside of the US, or what is that international piece like, if that's part of kind of your scope of work?
I wish we had more of an international presence. We do get requests, we get inquiries. The short answer to why not is really regulatory restrictions. So the way these types of work go is each professional has to be licensed in the state where she lives, and then also in the location where the student lives. And so, that leads just for the US alone, that leads to an incredible amount of cross-licensing logistics and coordination to help therapists get the additional state recognition beyond their own state. And we just haven't gotten there to, going cross-border with that and figuring out what each country's local license is. But we get a lot of requests for it. And I think there's something important to be done there too.
In my field, I'm a pediatrician. They had similar rules. Like, if I wanted to practice and see a child, I'd have to be in the same state. Telemedicine has relaxed a lot of the rules with COVID. And I'm curious whether there's a similar relaxation. Maybe it hasn't happened yet, but do you foresee that happening, where maybe one day a therapist in Florida can treat a patient in New Hampshire? Like, would that sort of thing be possible down the road, do you think?
I think it will be. I mean, I certainly think it should be. And what has happened, we haven't seen those waivers or those cross-state acknowledgements come through yet in COVID. But what we are seeing is, finally seeing some more action on some of the proposed interstate compacts, where a number of states are coming together and, mutually acknowledging each other's licenses. And so to me, that tells me that, there's more momentum here. And, the goal, of course, is to get to full compact across all the states.
Is your sense that this will continue to be, let's call it the new normal after folks have gotten vaccinated for COVID, and maybe that is not the same sort of level of threat that it is today, and folks start going back to school? Do you still sense that there will still be this need for teletherapy at the same level that you're seeing today?
Short answer, yes. There's a couple of things that I think have changed for good and won't go back to the way they were. One is just an acceptance of teletherapy. There used to be so much more of a skepticism or disbelief that it could really work. And we've moved past that more quickly than anyone would have expected because everyone had to try it. And so many more people have seen for themselves that it can be done, that a lot more can be done through teletherapy than people would have thought prior to this. And so, we talked about teletherapy exists. It emerged to cover gaps. There are a lot of gaps. Right now, there are more gaps than ever before in what services students should be receiving and what they are receiving. They're always there because what caused all this in the first place, the capacity constraints, the hiring constraints, those are still there. The gaps are getting bigger because we have more and more children coming into the education system, getting diagnosed with needs. We're over 7 million IEPs and counting, and you still have a very limited professional, group to get the work done. So I think, now that people have, kind of seen it and believe it, that you can do teletherapy, I think it'll just be used to fill a lot more of those gaps that were already there. The other thing, maybe even a bigger dynamic that I think has changed for good is the awareness of the benefits of remote work and maybe a growing preference for it from the workforce. And that determines everything, right? If this is how clinicians want to work, how they're going to choose to work, then, I think more interactions with students will need to happen this way.
It's a really good point. And I'm just thinking of the demand seems so clear the way you laid it out. Like so many students have a need. So many teachers are not equipped to handle that need. And then there's the supply side, the supply of expertise. Are you having a hard time keeping up with that demand? Like, is there enough supply of expertise out there, especially given all the other stuff that folks are kind of getting pulled into, like experts are doing mental health counseling and, other types of work, that you're able to keep up with the amount of demand that you're seeing?
It is hard to keep up with the demand. I mean, it's the biggest restriction on us growing as fast as we want to grow and doing as much as we want to is getting the right professionals and recruiting them. I think what we aspire to do is really expand the workforce of who is, qualified and available and interested in doing the work with kids in schools. I think we already do that in one way, which is that it used to be that, you might, as a speech and language pathologist, you might go work in a school early in your career and spend a few years there. But those are really high stress jobs. They involve a lot of driving around from site to site, very heavy caseloads. And so, what used to happen before teletherapy as a career path was an option was they would opt out often after having children and deciding that they wanted a bit more control over their schedules. Probably should have mentioned, this is a very high concentration of women in these professions. So speech language pathologists are over 95% women. And we recruit them to basically stay and keep on doing the work with kids in schools and say, you don't have to leave and go to private practice. You don't have to leave and go work in a clinic working with adults. You can keep on engaging with these kids who you want to help, and you don't have to do it in that, traditional full-time on-site structure. And so that's how we grew and recruited and have gotten to over 1,500 clinicians who've chosen to do it that way. And I think that really does expand, at least thinking about, who is available to do this for kids in schools. I think we've really helped expand the workforce. But the other really important work to do is at the start in the degree programs and generating more awareness of these professions. I think these are really attractive jobs. I mean, they pay well and they're really rewarding. And, my hope is to get more engaged. We are getting more engaged with the graduate programs and even undergraduate programs to broaden the awareness.
There's so many parts of your professional story that are so interesting to me. One part that we haven't talked about is your book. So you wrote a book, as I understand it, The Good Boss, 9 Ways That Every Manager Can Support Women. And you just talked about the fact that a lot of your workforce is women. And you talked about acquisition. I'm curious about retention. Like, how do you, and maybe there are pieces of your book that you can allude to, but like, how do you keep specifically women in the workplace that are on your team motivated, excited about their professional growth?
Yeah, I mean, I have so many thoughts about this that I did write a book about it. And, the overall premise of the book is really putting the responsibility on managers and companies to really understand the experience of women in the workplace. In my own experience, the workplaces that I've been in were not really, built by women or designed for women, and particularly not for working moms. And so, what I do in my writing and do a lot in, my communications with our workforce in our recruiting and thinking about retention is I acknowledge the experience of working moms, the need for predictability in schedules, control over, not necessarily the overall workload, but which hours of the day they're committing to, the ability to, let life come into the traditional workday a little more. And, I think there are so many women out there who are very happy to get back on their computer and, do a little work later at night, early in the morning. It's, a lot of it is really acknowledging and trusting that, these women want to work, they're going to get the work done, but, they need some flexibility and some predictability in how it's all happening. And this year has, made that more critical than ever. We've had a lot of situations where women in our clinical network had to take temporary leaves. They had to change, make changes to their caseload or the hours that they were available to work, just dealing with the downflow of changing availability of childcare and school schedules. And is school going to be hybrid, or is it going to be in, or it's going to be at home? And, all of that impacts the availability of the work. So what we try to do more than anything else is make it very easy to come back, on your terms whenever you're ready, and remove that sort of stigma that has been out there for a long time that, a lot of women get really nervous to leave, even if things have gotten to a point where it's not sustainable. It's what will people think if I walk away? Or, if I walk away now, I'll lose all of the, credibility that I've built up. So we're trying to take that stress out of it and just say, we understand that things change, schedules change. And when you're ready, we've got lots of opportunity.
That's awesome. And I'm so curious to know what are some common things that you hear from maybe HR teams out there that you wish that they would do differently? Maybe some advice you would give HR teams out there in terms of how they can reduce that stigma for folks that are returning back because they feel like their professional career got sidelined for a while, or whatever the reason was that they're feeling that kind of angst. What would you suggest that they can do to help make that less stressful for folks coming back?
I think HR departments often treat changes in work or gaps in work as a signal of a lack of commitment to work, which is, probably the biggest mistake. I mean, there could be a lot of reasons that, someone makes that decision to take a break or have a gap in their time at work. I think we need to give credit that, whenever a woman expresses interest in a job, especially when that's coming back to the workforce, that she's thought it through and she's applying for a job because she wants to work and is ready to work. And I think, we sort of ask questions or speculate rather than asking directly. And so I always encourage more of, if you have a question about a gap, ask, why did you stop working then? Why are you ready to come back now? But don't assume that it says something about, her dedication as a worker. There's a lot of assumptions that are made or imputed behind the scenes. I mean, the book goes through, a bunch of different examples of that. How do people react or change their viewpoint of a woman's ambition after she gets engaged is one topic that we go through in the book. And, how do people react to name changes once she gets married? There's so many examples. I promise I won't go through all of them here live, but the biggest piece of advice that I give to managers, leaders, HR departments is don't assume, give her credit that, if you assume anything, assume that she has ambition to work and desire to work.
That's really concrete advice. I appreciate that. The other audience that I'm keeping in mind is that we have a lot of students that are early on in their healthcare careers and young professionals that are just starting out. And so for those folks, what advice would you give in terms of as they emerge into the marketplace and think about all their options that are out in front of them. You alluded to the fact that, working from home is becoming increasingly attractive to a lot of folks. What are other things that they ought to be thinking about as they start their journey in clinical medicine?
I think there are so many more options for ways to work that it's a really great time to be starting out in your career, because I think, you can ask yourself, what do I really love doing? And then figure out which of the job options allows you to do that more often than anything else. And that's part of why telehealth opportunities, online teaching, teletherapy, all of these areas, it's part of, I think, why they become appealing, because there's more actual concentrated patient time, which tends to be the thing that gets people excited and is what they love to do. Whether or not the online modality or in-room modality is what gives you energy, I think there's more opportunity right out of the gate to decide that for yourself and to try it out. The other piece of advice I always give everyone is, your first job doesn't have to be where you spend decades of your career either. So there's always value in trying out something and getting experience. I think you are in a much better position to appreciate your job once you've had a variety of a few different environments to compare it against.
That's awesome advice. And it's an interesting point I had not really thought about, the fact that you actually may spend more time doing clinical work because you're not commuting, not getting ready and doing paperwork and all that. You're literally just kind of going from family to family.
Yeah.
Listen, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much. I can't believe that we're done already. That flew by. It was a really interesting conversation.
Awesome. Well, I'm Rishi Desai. Thanks for checking out today's show. Remember to do your part to flatten the curve and raise the line. We're all in this together.
For more information on how you can help raise the line and flatten the curve, go to osmosis.org/COVID-19. If you like this podcast, please share it on your social channels. You can also subscribe to the series and check out all of our podcasts at osmosis.org/raise the line podcast.